Hello, everyone. It is good to see you all. For those of you who are returning, I'm beginning to connect some names that I'm seeing on the screen with some interactions that I've had with some of you through the Beit Midrash and comments and questions. So it's good to see faces and kind of connect them with the names. And I noticed that my mother is on here today. So I have to do an extra okay job. All right, so what I'm hoping we can do today is to look at two additional prayers. One is going to be Sim Shalom, which comes at the end of the Amidah. And then the other is going to be another part of the Torah service, Vezot HaTorah Asher Samoshe. So we'll be looking at that. What I would like to start with this week is a little bit of a grammar lesson. And I've chosen this particular topic based on a number of questions that have been coming to me through the week. There seem to be some patterns, so I'm choosing to address different points of grammar where there seems to be the most interest/confusion. So I want to start today by spending a little bit of time talking about nouns in Hebrew and how nouns work in Hebrew. And then once we get through that, we'll stop for a moment, see if there are questions, any additional kind of grammar questions, and then we will go on to some of the passages from the Siddur. Beginning either next week or the week after, we will shift to prayers and blessings that are specific for the high holidays that you will encounter not in the daily or the Shabbat prayer book, but specifically in the prayer book for the high holidays, which is called the Machzor. So I am going to begin by doing a little bit of a share screen. And what we're going to be talking about in this brief grammar lesson is how nouns work. And what I'm introducing here is the same whether you're reading something from Torah, whether you're looking at Siddur, whether you're engaged with modern Hebrew. So although there are some differences with different Hebrew kind of stages of the Hebrew language, what I'm teaching about nouns is universal, and you can apply it to any text that you are looking at. So one of the things about the Hebrew language, and we have this in a number of other languages too, is that every single noun is assigned either the category, under the category masculine or the category feminine. So in English, our nouns may have meanings that relate to gender, but not every single noun is assigned to either be a masculine grammatical noun or a feminine grammatical noun. And then there are other languages like German and Latin where there is a masculine, feminine, and then a kind of neutral, non-assigned. Biblical Hebrew and all the other Hebrews do not have a neutral. And one of the challenges and interesting conversations that's going on in Israel now, and folks who are interested in kind of updating the Hebrew language to make it a little less gender binary, there are a lot of different explorations about how to address those challenges. If you're interested, you can send me an email during the week and I can point you toward some conversations that are taking place. So I just wanted to start with the acknowledgement of the gender assignment for every noun. All right, I'm going to start with a screen share and take you through some of the basics of the ways that noun works. So, as I just said, Hebrew nouns are all assigned gender, either feminine or masculine. Now, in many cases, the feminine and masculine are kind of obvious. So the Hebrew word for woman is a feminine noun. The Hebrew word for man is a masculine noun. So sometimes you can assume that because of the meaning of a word, it's going to be assigned a masculine or a feminine. However, the majority of words don't have any kind of distinctive gender meaning. And so, for example, the word for stone, even, is feminine. The word for hand, yad, is assigned to the feminine category. Or the word voice, kol, is assigned to the masculine. The word for name, shem, is assigned to the masculine. So frankly, for most of the nouns that we have, it's not that obvious how something comes to be connected to masculine or feminine forms. And so it's a matter of learning new vocabulary and then learning whether it's masculine or feminine. Now, the majority of nouns are assigned to the masculine. So I want to focus on the feminine because you can usually assume that if something doesn't fall into the feminine category, that it's a masculine noun. So how do we identify nouns that are feminine in grammar? And it's usually because the letter hey ends the word. So the word isha, meaning woman, ends with a hey. The word for family, mishpacha, ends with a hey. So when you come across nouns that end with a hey, with very, very, very few exceptions, you know that the noun is a feminine noun. In addition, you have a few cases where feminine nouns end with the Hebrew letter taf. And so malchut, that I think we actually referred to in our very first session together, anything that ends with the taf ut, kingship, is marked grammatically as feminine. Or the word for truth, emet, ends with the taf, and truth is a feminine. There are a handful of words, really about 15 or so, that you would encounter with regularity in a prayer book that are that don't have any of these markers, and yet they are feminine. I'm in the process of putting together a PDF of some of the most common words and common forms for folks to download. And hopefully that will be ready for you for our last session. Okay, so that is one piece of what I wanted to point out. If we want to take any feminine noun and make it plural, then you're going to drop the hey or the taf from the very end of the word, and you'll see oats added on to the final. So when you see a noun that has ot at the end, it means that you are dealing with a noun that is feminine and is plural. The masculine here, I'm sorry, let me give you an example of how this works out. So if we have the word mishpacha, and I'm sorry I didn't put vowels in here, the word for family, we see a hey at the end, so we know this is a feminine noun. Well, first thing is get rid of that hey. And then your next step is to put in ot. So while mishpacha means a family, mishpechot means families. It's plural. Now, because the masculine nouns have such a wide variety of endings, it's often safe to assume that a noun is masculine unless you see a hey or a taf, or unless you're dealing with the 15 or so exceptions to the rule. So with the masculine nouns, there's nothing I can point to, like a hey at the end, that marks that it's masculine. But one thing that I can tell you is that with any noun that is masculine, let me stop my share for a second. For any noun that is masculine, it's going to end, you're going to take the word, you're going to add a chirik e, and a yud and a mem sofit, im. So davar is a masculine word. Davar means word or matter. So if I want to make davar plural, I'm going to say devarim. The im at the end will tell me that I'm dealing with a masculine plural noun. So again, ot at the end tells you you have a feminine plural. Im at the end tells you that you have a masculine plural. Now, let me just pause for a second and talk about this whole kind of gender assignment. There's a conversation that has existed for centuries about what it means that certain nouns are assigned gender. One thing that I want to make clear is that the assignment of gender has a lot less to do with what the word means. So in most cases, if a word is in the masculine, it doesn't mean that in ancient Hebrew, there was association of masculinity with that noun. It simply means that because a noun is masculine, it will take the adjectives and the verbs that are in the masculine form. Now, in Torah, this allows for some very interesting things. So for example, we're quite a ways from Passover, but I think this is a lovely example. Much of the story of Passover and the way that God delivers the people from Egypt is by describing the power of God's arm. And so often it's not that God has brought the people out of Israel, but the Zroa Adonai, the arm of God, has delivered or saved the people or is fighting on behalf of the people. Since the word for arm, Zroa, is feminine, you get a really interesting passage where it says Zroa Elohim, and then all of the adjectives and verbs that are describing what God is doing, all of God's actions are actually in the feminine. So it's interesting to look at different kinds of passages where we might assume masculinity, but the verbs and the adjectives that are describing God are actually using the feminine, because if it's Eish Adonai, the fire of God, then it's going to be feminine. The arm of God is going to be feminine. Yad Elohim is going to be feminine. So there are a lot of kind of interesting things that come up with this. All right. One other thing about the nouns, and then we'll pause to take some questions. All of these nouns, masculine, feminine, singular, or plural, you can always assume that if you just see that noun, it's going to mean a family or families. That is, they're indefinite. The way that you then take a noun and make it definite, the kind of the the word, is by putting a hey, ha, in front of the noun. So if I go back to my word mishpacha, family, if I want to make it the family, it's going to be ha mishpacha. Or if I'm going into the plural, mishpechot, if I want to say instead of families, the families, I'm going to say ha mishpechot. So let me take a moment to just pause. And Julie, if you wouldn't mind helping me out to see if there are any questions. And again, if you do have a question, just type it into the chat.
Absolutely. So one person asked, where did it go? What is the difference between ani and anochi?
Okay. Ani and anochi are completely interchangeable. Ani tends to be used more often in all texts, whether they're biblical or kind of classical. Anochi tends to be used more in biblical texts, and it's just an alternative, but it doesn't mean that it's any more formal. So you can take ani and anochi as really interchangeable.
Which siddur and machzor are you using?
So the examples that I am using for these sessions is what the Hebrew program Davka provides. So Davka is a Hebrew word processing program, kind of like Word. And part of the feature is that they have all of the text for the Siddur, so they tend to use the more traditional. When we talk next week about the blessings that are recited when you're called up for an aliyah at the Torah, I will then bring a couple of different variations because there is more significant variety in the ways that different movements address the language of chosenness.
Oh, do we have time for another question or two?
Sure.
So the definite articles don't have to have gender or number, and then also about the, is it with a kamatz gadol?
Okay. So the hey is simply attached. The hey looks the same, whether it's masculine, feminine, singular, or plural. Putting the hey in front just takes that whole noun in whatever form it's in and makes it definite. Most of the time, the hey has the vowel patach, which is the little kind of horizontal line under the letter ha. At times, it will be lengthened to the kamatz that looks like the little T. And that often has to do with words that begin with gutturals. and kind of compensating for some things we can't do with gutturals. So there will be a few varieties.
And then there was just a request for either today or in the future to review some more of the prepositions.
Great. Prepositions on my list for next week.
Great.
So, all right. So let's move on now to a little bit of prayer study. And again, I'm going to pop up a screen. And let me get this as big as I can for you so it's easier to read. All right, week 3. So the first text that I would like to look at is Sim Shalom. Now, one of the things that I've heard from a lot of you this week is that when you encounter different fonts and different prints, you find it confusing because the letters don't look exactly the same. And so for some of the letters that are a little harder to really absorb, that those slight differences can be a bit of a problem. So before we look at all of Sim Shalom, I want to just focus on 2 different fonts for just a few of the words to help you take notes of what some of the differences are. And for the exercises this week, I will provide you with a few different fonts of the same text so that you can start getting used to the slight differences with the letters. To some extent, the differences are kind of like serif or you know, sans serif. In other words, a little extra, you know, a little extra fancy. So for example, this first word, sim, begins with a sin, with the dot here. Here is a shin, because the dot is here, but it's the same consonant. So here it looks like it's curved at the bottom. And in this one, it's got a flat line at the bottom. This is just about different fonts. But you can see what they share is this 3-pronged piece. So this here is just making the font a little bit fancier. Whether it's flat at the bottom or rounded does not matter, but hopefully you can see where they are similar. The shin, originally this letter came from the word for teeth. And so a long time ago, this shin was stylized to look a little bit more like a couple of teeth. All right, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I wanted to point out some that can be a little bit confusing. So Lamed from Shalom. So here we have a font that just gives you a curve up and then across and up. Here the curve doesn't look exactly the same, but you're still moving out and then across and up. Right? So again, just 2 different variations. The mem sofit, when the mem is at the very end of a word and it takes a different form than its regular mem, you can see here how it looks a lot more boxed and squared, and it's got this little flare on the top. As long as it is pretty close to something that looks like a box, it's a mem sofit. And we can contrast this if we look at the last word on the top line, chesed, a samech, and a samech in another font. And you can see that these, the samech, is more circular than the mem sofit. And again, the form is not identical, but they both have a more circular shape. And again, this font has a little extra oomph to it. Let me point out just two more. The Dalid, let's start here. The last word on chesed, the Dalid here, you can see is formed by a line at the top and then a vertical line down, but the line is not all the way over to the edge. It's in a little bit. So here is a Dalid. And again, the main part of this still has a little extra hanging here. Now, the Dalid is sometimes confused with the Resh. So the Resh, and now I'm on the second line, the first word, here is a Resh. And notice how the Resh doesn't have on the top, the line does not extend out beyond the vertical. It's really just one line down. The Resh in another font down at the very bottom, Verachamim. Again, you can see it's done with one stroke instead of two. Okay, so I just wanted to point some of this out to help those of you who are encountering different Hebrew fonts in different Sidurim. And again, I'll have the entire Sim Shalom prayer in a few different fonts for you so that you can look at the whole thing. All right, now let's talk a little bit about this, this prayer. Sim Shalom often appears at the end of the Amidah. So sometimes when people are coming back and they're gathering together after they're kind of silent, going through the silent Amidah, depending on whether it's a morning or evening service, you'll find Sim Shalom. There are a lot of really popular tunes, so you may be familiar with the tunes, the nusach, right? The musical notes that go with this. One of the reasons that I chose this, apart from the fact that it's very common and that you'll find Sim Shalom in pretty much any prayer book of any denomination, is that this prayer is a treasury of vocabulary words. So all of the words that I have highlighted here are very common, key, repetitive words that you will find in prayer books. So I want to talk for a few minutes about some of these words. I will give you vocabulary lists with these and some exercises for you to do during the week. But I wanted to talk about just a few of them to help you perhaps remember them. So let's start with just chen, vachesed, ve'rachamim. 3 words here that are all over the place. You will find many different English translations for these words, and that is because there aren't really any good English words that kind of encapsulate the full meaning of these words. So chen and chesed are both about gifts that come from God. Chen, if you think about the story of Abraham, when suddenly God calls to Abraham and says, Lech lecha, go out to this land that I will show you, and I'm going to make you the father of a great nation. The text never tells us that Abraham did anything to receive that or to earn that. So this kind of notion of a gift from God is the word chen. In English, the word chen is often translated as grace, which within Christian contexts becomes a loaded word. So you may see grace, but the idea is that God will sometimes give without an expectation of something in return. The next word, chesed, has to do with what God gives us when we make a commitment to the covenant, to a brit. So in the Bible, all of the talk about the different kinds of covenants, the covenant that God offers the people of Israel at Sinai, this is a chesed kind of relationship, because chesed means that we have obligations on our part to worship only God, to observe mitzvot, and what we receive from God then is God's chesed. It's often translated as loving kindness, which I think is fine. It's just something that comes specifically from God as part of our relationship. Then the last word here, ve'rachamim. Rachamim has the meaning of compassion. You will see rachamim a lot in the Machzor because we are constantly asking for God's compassion given the limitations of human beings. And for those of you who are kind of interested in the roots, the root of rachamim is resh chet mem, which means rechem. And rechem, the Hebrew word rechem, means womb. So rachamim, compassion, is often kind of claimed as a term that describes aspects of God that may be associated with the feminine. You can also tell the word chen is masculine. There's no he or taf at the end. The word chesed is masculine. And verachamim is masculine plural. Here's our im. Okay, a few more terms. I have to say this is one of my favorite blessings because I just love to just say all of these words because they are just so beautiful. So in this first box, Torat Chaim. So you may recognize from Torat the word Torah. Torah is usually spelled with a hey at the end. But one thing we can do with feminine nouns that end in a hey is instead of, if we just had Torah Chaim, we would have it mean Torah, comma, life. When we take out the hey and replace it with this taf, we get a something of something. So the Torah of life, or a Torah of life. Chai, life, living, chayim. So Torah of life, a living Torah. Ahavat chesed, we've looked at ve'ahavta, you shall love. So ahava usually ends with a hey as a feminine noun. And here by putting the taf in here, it connects these two words. So now it is love of chesed, right? Love of this kind of loving kindness. Tzedakah, a lot of people recognize from more, from kind of later Hebrew. Tzedakah we associate a lot with charity, with giving. In these kinds of texts, the earlier texts, tzedakah really means righteousness, acts of righteousness. All right, one more. And then here are just two things that I just wanted to point out. The word echad, ke is a preposition, so you can ignore that for now. Echad is the number one. So one thing you might want to do, and you can probably kind of Google this and find this anywhere, is how to count to 10 in Hebrew. And echad is the number one. We saw that with the Shema, right? Adonai echad. And then or means light. And you will see this a lot, or, in our liturgy. The things like the bet before or, and the kaf before echad, one, are prepositions that we will be talking about next week. Okay, let me do a final reading. And again, you can go to the exercises where I'll give you slow reading, but just to take in the words while looking at the Hebrew instead of transliteration. Sim Shalom Tova Uvracha. So give peace, goodness, blessing. Something I might ask you in the exercises is the noun for blessing, bracha, masculine or feminine? Okay. Then, right, so we're asking God to give us peace, goodness, blessings, chen v'chesed v'rachamim, all different kinds of loving kindnesses, aleinu, for us, ve'al kol Yisrael, and for all of Israel, amecha. We talked about ha, your people. Barchenu, barach, we've seen with like baruch. So here we're actually giving a command to God. Barchenu, bless us. Avinu, our Father. Kulanu, all of us. Ke'echad, as one. Be'or panecha, in the light of your face. Ki ve'or panecha natata lanu, because with the light of your face, you have given us, O Adonai Eloheinu. And what have you given us? Torat Chaim, Torah of life, ve'ahavat chesed, and the love of chesed, utzdaka, and righteousness, uvracha, and blessing, verachamim, and compassion, v'chayim, and life, v'shalom, and peace. V'tov, and it is good, be'einecha, it's good in your eyes, ayin is an eye, livarech, to bless, et amcha Yisrael, to bless your people, Israel, bechol eit, at every time or season, uvechol, and at every sha'a, hour, bishlomecha, through your own peace. Okay. So, again, this is a great prayer to practice and to really take in the meaning of the words, because these are all so key. And if you think about how many times you have the assertion of goodness and life and blessing and compassion, that it's really a very, very kind of powerful piece. Let me show you one other thing very briefly, and then you'll have more time to look at this over the week. And so one other text I'm going to give you to look at over the week is a line that is sung or recited at the near the conclusion of a Torah service when the Torah is being put away. And often you will see people, if they're wearing a talit, they'll kind of hold up the fringes of the talit or hold up a prayer book. And you may know this as Vezot HaTorah Asher Sa Moshe Lifnei Bnei Yisrael Api Adonai Be'ad Moshe, and then goes into Eitz Chaim He. So again, I'm going to give this to you in a few different fonts so that you can practice reading it slowly. And basically this line is Vezot HaTorah. This is the, here's our ha, making it the Torah, hey, at the end, so it's a feminine noun. Asher, asher means which, that, who, whom. Sam Moshe, so this is the Torah which Moshe placed Lifnei Bnei Yisrael, before the people of Israel. Al pi Adonai, by the word of Adonai, beyad Moshe, through the hand or agency of Moshe. So again, for those of you who are going into the exercises each week and practicing the reading, I'm hoping that with each week, you'll see words or forms that, that you're able to start accumulating even a basic familiarity with some of the key words. And even though in 6 weeks we can't get you to understand all of the tefillah and all of the grammar, at least you can begin recognizing a lot of the pieces. All right.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
There were a couple of questions. Should people follow up with you on the website?
Maybe we can take like two
Great.
or three questions and then.
Great. So these are good questions. The first was, why is chen and chesed singular and rachamim plural in that list?
Yeah. So there are some words that just appear in the plural. We're not sure why. So rachamim, although we often translate it as compassion, might be understood more as like acts of compassion. It's also possible that rachamim as compassion is made plural, so it's clearly distinguished from rechem, womb, and to kind of try to maybe separate those out a little bit.
Okay, great. And the second question is about the vav before a word, meaning and. Sometimes it's pronounced v and sometimes u. Why?
So that has to do, again, many of the ways that the vowels are used have to do with the way we use our mouths and what happens. So I could say v gadol, and big or large. But if I try to say the word bayit, which means house, if, you know, you can do this in the privacy of your own homes, if you try to say ve vayit, if you say it over and over and over again, you'll find that it's very kind of trippy on the mouth and on the lips, and that it's much easier simply to say uvayit. And so I talk about the bump letters, bet, mem, pei, that usually take u, and sometimes there'll be other vowels as well, and it just has to do with the first letter of the word.